Welcome to Do It for the Gram and Enneagram podcast with your host, certified Enneagram coach Milton Stewart, where we do it for the Enneagram, not Instagram. We make moves to improve our lives and those in our community. I am extremely excited because I have a very, very good friend of mine. I really enjoy this person. And when I think of her, the word thoughtful comes up because she is one of the most thoughtful people that I actually know. And I admire her because of the deep inner work that she does. So I'm going to introduce her real quick. We have Chelsea Witbrook, which I love, by the way, is a spiritual director and Enneagram educator based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She is certified through Somatic Enneagram and offers somatic coaching. She teaches a 5-month experiential Enneagram course for personal transformation, is the creator of the Enneaplaque, a meditation tool for awakening, and hosts a podcast called The Enneagram of Essence. She is the former president of Enneagram Minnesota, a chapter of the International Enneagram Association. When she's not working, Chelsea is zipping around Minneapolis on her bike, gardening, laughing with friends, joining conversations and actions for social justice, reading, writing, and singing songs to her dogs, Chancho and Huckleberry. To learn more about her offerings, just go to chelseawitbrook.com.
And it's now officially been changed to chelseawitbrook.com.
There we go.
So my former name is out.
Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be in the show notes, corrected for sure. How are you doing, Chelsea? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to have this conversation. So good to be with you.
So this is so cool. All right, so I'm super excited. So this all got started. I had a good friend of mine, one of the people who actually introduced me to the Enneagram, but I actually took it, I went down the journey of it really deep. And they called me and said, you need to do episodes interviewing specific people in the different countertypes. Right. And so I was like, oh, they was like, because people need to understand and hear from people who operate in a way that maybe the two energies of their dominant instinct and their passion kind of collide, or they don't go the same way in a sense. So they really wanted me to get people on. So I'm super excited to have Chelsea here, who is a one-to-one sexual one, also known as zeal, um, to really illuminate what is maybe the difference and how you found your type. So my first question for you is, when did you and how did you discover your Enneagram type? And what were some of the differences you saw when you were like, well, some of this aligns, but I'm a little different when it comes to some parts of my type oneness or instinct?
Hmm. Yeah. So I had heard about the Enneagram first through my spiritual direction formation training, but we didn't really get into it. My spiritual director knew about it though. And so she had me um, watch some panel interviews online. And I think the type 1 panel was the very first one I watched. And I cried through the whole thing. And
Mm,
I was pissed through the whole thing.
yes.
Because I really did feel like, oh no, God smote me with the worst type. Like, could not possibly get any worse than this. And so, yeah, it was an uncomfortable awakening, but then at least, luckily, I had my spiritual director there. I wasn't fumbling through it on my own. So then we could like work through it in sessions and, yeah, with that added support, then I was able to come to a place of more acceptance around my
Right.
personality, not hating it.
Yeah, I do find it tough at times for when people have the type one structure and they find out they're like, no, 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 I don't know about this one. Um,
Yeah, well, and the thing that was really shocking for me was like I hadn't consciously named my anger at that point. Like I didn't know that I was an angry person, but everybody around me knew it. everybody around me knew it, especially because of my dominant instinct, where the anger is coming out more in a more
Right.
intense way than other ones. But I still didn't know. I still didn't see it. Um, I was just passionate, and I just cared
Mhm.
a lot about things, and I was also right about everything.
Tell the truth, yeah. Just tell them.
So I didn't see that as anger, but of course, it was being fueled from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was like, so when you discovered the one and then you discovered the sexual one, what was some of the ahas that hit you in the way that you operate or the sexual one operates with anger?
Okay, the places where it felt like, oh, this is kind of different than what they're these descriptions of ones who like are always following the rules and um like just like it's like, yeah, to a certain extent that's kind of true, and there's a lot of rules I break because I think they're dumb or unjust. And so um having that, like sort of fieriness of that sexual instinct, I think then sort of fuels that pushback against rules, and um yeah, is like really a little bit more like outspoken about that in a quick way. Mhm.
So
Here
something
I
I know
hear
about. Oh, go ahead.
I just hear a lot of other ones who are like, "Oh, I don't know if I could do that." Like, that's, you know, that's pushing against, what's, I don't know, expected or whatever, but um there's more like self-controlled. Like I experienced other ones as more self-controlled in a way that I admire, because I feel like my energy is sort of like overflowing and slopping around oftentimes. I wish I could be more self-controlled.
It's that slide around.
Like sloshing, like just
Yeah.
a big cup of emotions that's like spilling over the top. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things, and I find it amazing because you found out, the oneness during like in a spiritual direction, like when you were being spiritually directed. So sometimes I think for zeal or type one, sexual one, sometimes like the focus of the anger can be on other people not doing what they need to be doing. So what has been your inner work on making sure you utilize maybe a healthy righteous anger or your inner work to make sure you're doing the inner work? Because I know a lot of ones may not find it necessarily in a area where they're trying to focus on improving themselves. So what was something that helped you to make sure your inner work and your journey is like, okay, let me make sure I bring it back to self.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this pattern of reforming the other
Mm,
is so strong, um that, like, so I've been practicing meditation in a pretty serious way for over a decade now, and still to this day, like, the thing that where my mind goes when I sit down on the meditation cushion and then it gets distracted is um thinking about how I can teach something better, drop in the right words at the right time to get somebody to see the light, to change their thinking. And like, it's not always coming from a pure place. It's like, it's inflating my own ego as being the one who has the answers, who has something to offer, which, like, on one level may be true. Like, I do have a lot of tools and skills and experience, and I can feel the difference of, like, when it's getting tight around needing this other person to understand, because then that makes me a good teacher. Like, somehow their competence or their level of development or their level of kindness or whatever feels like it reflects on me. And that especially shows up, like, where I've had to do a lot of work with that. Well, it is like in my literal work and teaching, but like the places in my life, like when I look back at, like, how has this pattern almost killed me?
Right.
Because it has. Was that in my younger year, like all of my 20s, so probably for over a decade, I chose to date people who were major fixer-uppers.
Mm.
And, um, and this, like, real pull into codependency is, I think it's almost inherent in the sexual one, because I'm not okay, like, I can't relax unless you're improving.
Mm.
And so then my well-being depends on your well-being. And so I was just in this pattern of giving so much to people and trying to do their work for them. And yeah, like, and it got to the point where I was completely exhausted, didn't know who I was anymore, had, like, lost friends, lost my hobbies, lost my joy, because I had a savior complex, like, for real. Like,
Right.
yeah, thought it was all up to me to save these people who were, making really dangerous and horrible decisions with their lives, things like addiction and things like
Mhm.
this. And so, um, it was, like, for me, what feels like my miracle and my turning point was, I found my way into Al-Anon, which is a 12-step group, for family and friends of alcoholics. And that's where I started doing my own work on me and shifting the focus of attention off of the other person and learning, first of all, some basic self-care. Like,
Right.
are you eating 3 meals a day? Are you sleeping 8 hours a night? Are you staying hydrated? Are you not isolating? Are you, talking to trusted people when you have feelings? Um, and really, yeah, shifting that focus of attention, but then even further beyond that, then, like, to the inner world and, like, oh, I could be using all of that wasted energy on
Right.
me, because it is wasted energy, right? That's
Mhm.
like, if they're not asking for it, if they're not ready for change, then it's completely wasted energy.
Right.
So I started redirecting that energy onto myself and my own learning and my own spiritual practices and mindfulness and self-compassion practices, specifically, I think were huge for me. So, yeah, but it took hitting a rock bottom, and then it took a community, to
Mm.
be able to relearn some of those patterns.
Yeah. So what you're saying reminds me, I have a uncle, late 60s, just discovered he's a sexual one. And you talk about fiery. I think I gave this example on a former episode where he had a younger brother ask him for some help, but the younger brother's making bad decisions. And my older uncle, who's the sexual one, gave a very blunt, very sharp reaction or response to him. And it was like, in front of the whole family, I was like, oh my goodness. It was very honest. It was very true, but it was very painful to his brother. And so I tried to mediate. I was like, well, this is what he's trying to say. And I like mediated that Thanksgiving. It was so interesting. But since discovering he's a sexual one, and this goes back to what you were saying, learning self-care, learning to turn energy towards yourself. Because I asked him, I said, what do you do for fun or enjoy? And he didn't really know what to answer. He didn't know how to answer it. And so what has like doing self-care and turning your energy towards yourself given you?
Mm, yeah. Oh my gosh. It's given me so many things. Like, I just want to say, like, life, like
Mm,
capital L life. Um, and really to discover honesty, like radical honesty, that I can see myself clearly without um having that be like the end of the world. Because when I first started seeing it, it was the kind of felt like the end of the world. But picking up some of these, like the self-care of self-compassion and what that means and how you practice that, learning to accept all parts of me. um yeah, it just has loosened me up, like both sort of like on an internal level, but also like it's kind of had to start with like physical loosening me up, like stretching and yoga and getting massages, because there was so much tension and rigidity in my whole body. And then that, of course, affects, the mind and the
mhm,
emotions. And so loosening up my body loosened up me to be able to feel a broader range of feelings, including happiness and joy and like
mhm,
honest grief that also feels really good, instead of just being pissed all the time. Like being sad feels a lot more clean and pure.
mm,
And so I discovered like the joy of sadness. Um, and yeah, just to be able to connect with people in a real way, not just through this filter of like how aligned are we in our beliefs and values, and if we're not 100% aligned, get out of my face. Like that's kind
right,
of the way
right.
that relationships were before, or at least internally, even if I wasn't saying it or acting that out, because I was also trying to be a nice person. um
Mhm,
but internally, that's what was happening. Like, "Oh, I'll just
right.
tolerate you. I'll tolerate you being around me, but, like, I don't respect you." Um,
Mm,
and I was like, that's a very isolating place to be. It's super lonely because, like, my whole life, even back when I was really trapped in these patterns, um, I've always been kind of the ringleader of social groups that I've been a part of. So I've always been um like gathering people and around people, uh and despite that, feeling lonely because of
mm,
that little internal hierarchy system that gets set up of like um making myself um better than, like there's a real arrogance to that
mhm,
reforming of others. And so that internal making myself better than, or then at times, of course, it all falls apart and it flips and I'm worse than everybody. And
right.
so there's like kind of the two extremes, but either one is a super lonely place to be. And so doing that work has then also created real, like, more softness in my heart around like
Mm,
just a real connection with people, regardless of if they're perfect,
Right.
right? Because there's just more acceptance around like, no, that's not a realistic thing to expect. And so if we're gonna love, we gotta agree right now that we're gonna love imperfect people, starting with myself.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. I love that. I love that. Um, so I don't know if people know, but Chelsea has this amazing book on the inner critic, and we'll definitely have an episode on that because I love the way you help illuminate that the inner critic is not just only for the type one.
Yeah.
So you do a wonderful job with that. But I'll let we'll do that on another episode. What I
Okay.
want to focus on here is when it comes to your inner critic, the sexual one's inner critic, where does it tend to focus first? Like where does it like a heavy primary focus of what should be critiqued first? How does it operate within you to a degree?
It shows up in so many different ways. So I'll see if I can name a few of them. But one that I've been noticing a lot recently is like it disguises itself as like a little inner spiritual coach. Like it's it's like constantly giving me like tips and things to tweak to like make sure we're in alignment, make sure we're present right now, make sure we're being ethical, make sure you're staying in your integrity, and here's how we're going to do it. And so it's like very well intentioned, and it's like really coming from this like, we got to hold it together, girl, come on, like don't fall
Mhm.
apart. um and and so there's actually a fear behind it if I stop and check it out. But like if I'm just going through my day and not paying attention, it just creeps in and can be disguised as a voice of wisdom because it really seems like it's got some good ideas. um and and so to again, it's like it kind of comes back to this question of like, well, but is that coming from a place of expansiveness or contraction? Like, is there tightness around it? And so to check in with my body, because sometimes I can't tell, is this my conscience or is this my inner critic?
Mm.
And it can take me, sometimes I'll be like on a trip for 1 week, 2 weeks before I even remember to ask that question and drop in and be like, wait a second, something's a little bit off here.
Right.
I've been like pushing, pushing, pushing. That's not the way. That's not the way.
Right.
So it's like a little inner taskmaster, but because I've like it used to be really, really cruel and mean, but
Hmm.
I've sort of like caught on to that one. And so that one doesn't show up much anymore. It has disguised itself now as like the wise one.
Wow,
I'm
that's
just
tricky.
like, dang it, dang it.
It said, "I'll just switch the way I do it." Oh, okay. We're gonna try a different way.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it adapts. It takes on these new forms. Like every time I think I'm onto it, it really finds something new. Um, but then I do notice too, like in a very different flavor of inner critic, like when I will, if something like really stressful kind of knocks me off my center and I do slide over into that four space,
mhm.
um, that inner critic is very different. Um,
Right.
it's like really feels like shame. It's like I get withdrawn. I don't want to make eye contact with people. Um, I feel like a burden, like everything I'm doing is wrong. There's something wrong with me. And it's more of this just like seething, writhing,
Right.
dark, slimy thing that doesn't really have words. It's just a feeling. Whereas, like, I feel like when I'm in that one space, it is like jabbering away with actual words in my mind. But yeah, so there's like this whole spectrum.
Mm, mm. I know it's a lot, like, like,
Hmm.
mm. So this is one of the reasons I love thinking about subtypes because it breaks us down in such an interesting way. Because even though me being a 7 and you having a type pattern of a 1, like there are things because being a one-to-one or a sexual one that you do that are way more adventurous and explorative than I do as a self-preservation 7. And I find that so fascinating because our how our instincts and passions collide. So
Mm,
I think to understand the subtypes means so much, right? Because it's like your ability to be adventurous or to go out and to test boundaries and to do things in some ways is beyond the way that I do things, which I find really fascinating. And like when me, you, and Ben are together and we do stuff, and you're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna do this." Like, "Oh, okay, all right, cool." It's so fascinating to me. Um, so I have a question. Like, what are I would say something you really enjoy about being the specific subtype of the sexual one? What are some things you actually really enjoy or you feel that are specific gifts that you're given when when it's managed, when you're present and you can utilize some of that beautiful energy that comes with that pattern?
yeah. Um, I think, yeah, there's several things. So one is like the willingness to take risks and like, there's of course there's always a fine line like to check like am I being reckless here or um is this a risk that's calling me, like inviting me into something deeper?
Mhm.
And this having this dominant instinct helps me, I think, to easier say yes to that when something uncomfortable comes up where I kind of have the intuition like this is going to be good for me, but it's going to be hard or painful even, um or really vulnerable, like putting
Right.
myself out there and being seen in a new way, um that this instinct can like really can can help me do that in ways that like when I'm grounded I can uh do it in a like say yes to it and do it in a measured way, in a where I'm not just jumping in blindfolded in because that's like the other version of it that gets me in trouble is
Right, right.
like whoa, how did I end up here? Whoops. um so had to watch out for that for sure, because I would say one way to describe this instinct, this one-to-one or sexual instinct, or some people like to call it the transmitting instinct, um, is like it is when we're in the average levels and not super present, it is an addiction to adrenaline. That's what it is. It's a drug hit, like a physical, the drug of adrenaline that's being released in my body when I'm doing risky things or new things or fast things, moving too
Mhm.
fast, um, is is shooting out these like stress hormones, which then become addictive. So that's just a side note, that I think is maybe helpful for people to understand and to start watching for, because that is a fuel, like adrenaline is helpful, it's there for a reason, but it's supposed to be there to kick in to get through either a really hard time or a dangerous thing. It's we can deplete those adrenal glands and then completely burn
Mm.
out. So if we're like running on that all the time. So that's just a side note. But back to the positive. See, as a one, I guess go to like what can be improved? What can I critique about myself? Can't stay on the positive for too long. Blah. Um, so anyway, back to positive. I think the charisma when I'm, doing it, using it with integrity, not manipulating people, but
Mm.
the the charisma can really attract people to the work. And um and so to be able to teach and lead with that type of energy that keeps people engaged, um just can just flow out of me. Like, it's not something I need to
Mhm.
practice or train for or think about. So I appreciate that. And it's kind of tied to that is like the transmission piece. And Mario Sikora talks about that it's like this energy. There's something in me that wants to be transmitted into the world,
Mhm.
and leave a lasting impact. It's like the legacy, the desire for a legacy. And that is very strong in me. And again, have to check myself, make sure it's not coming from an egoic place of wanting to, you know, be somebody, become somebody.
Mhm.
But to really be in service of the work and in service of awakening, and let that impact, um just flow, and like not hold it back,
Right.
not be in constant preparation mode or self-doubt mode around what I have to offer, but to just go for it.
Mhm.
Mm,
Mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, I love those things about you too. I see them, the energy and the way that you not only invite other people into the things that you care about and love, which are usually all things that help improve all of us, but the way you bring in energy and invite people in, I think is special and spectacular because I know it comes from a really deep, rich place. And I really value that in you. I really do. I admire that in you. It's really cool to watch. Like when you get excited and you want to share something, it's different than the way that I do it, and I love the way you do it. It's so fun and so cool, and usually well thought out compared to sometimes when I bring ideas. But it's really cool. So that is one reason I definitely want to plug our Enneagram retreat here as well. Um, for those listening, Chelsea and I, and we have another co-facilitator, Ben. We do a big Enneagram retreat where we're able to share some of these gifts and teach them at a much deeper level. That will be in the show notes, so you can link there. But one thing I do want to ask Chelsea, just wrapping up, for someone who is a one-to-one sexual or transmitting one, which if you don't know those terms, it's okay. It's all the same subtype. You just got different teachers who teach it a little bit different ways. End of the day, it's the same dominant subtype mixing with the passion um, of the type one. So, what would be some encouragement or some advice for someone who is a sexual one doing the work, and maybe because they have experienced the recklessness that can come with the unchecked instinct?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I was in this meeting one time where the topic of discussion was, would you rather be happy or right?
Mhm.
And that question changed my life. That's it. That's like the core of what it comes down to, because I can't choose both. But it feels like to my personality, that feels like one of those like Zen koans that like can't be cracked. Um
Mhm.
because what do you mean I could be happy and not right? Like, does not compute. Like, what? So
Right.
to really sit with that and like feel the truth of that question, um I think is a very valuable thing for sexual ones to meditate on and like take a good honest look at it, because for me, and like check it out for yourself, don't believe me, but for me, when I'm in that place of being right, there is something juicy about it and addictive about it, but it automatically comes with the seething resentment. Like
Mm,
they are paired together.
yeah.
And so I cannot be happy when I'm in that state of irritation, and agitation. So, and then the other question that changed my life, which sounds so simple now, but like at the time, it really blew my mind, was like, what if there's more than one way to be right?
Mm,
And letting other people find what's right for them. And then I just like can't emphasize enough like how much reward there is when we take that essential move of like the shifting of the focus of my attention off of the other, off of what's wrong about the other or inadequate, and shift it onto myself, not to judge what's wrong or inadequate about myself, but to see where could I love myself better? Where and how can I love myself better? And that's a whole different question. And I can ask that about other people too. Like, how can I love other people better? Um, and then last thing I'll say is it's also been a really beautiful practice for me to start intentionally sharing in a verbal way genuine compliments to other people. Because if I'm not looking for what's good about them and expressing it, which feels really good, by the way, if I'm not doing that, the mind automatically is getting sucked into the judgment, the criticism, the stress of what's wrong and where we could be instead. And so, yeah, just compliments, genuine gratitude, and like getting it out of my mouth in a way that the other person gets to receive it. And then that kind of breaks through some of that like rigidity around the heart.
mm.
Because it's just warm and fuzzy to be able to give
Right.
someone a compliment
Yeah.
when it's genuine, right? So yeah, I think those are the reflections and practices that come to mind.
Thank you for that. That's very important. And the type one's heart is so beautiful and fluffy. It's just the work to express that part of it, you know. So I absolutely love that. Um, so how can people find out more about Chelsea Whitbrook and the things you got going on?
Yes. So chelseawitbrook.com is probably the best place. And if you want to get on my monthly newsletter list, there's a little place you can sign up for that on the bottom of the website. And yeah, on my newsletter, then I'm just sharing all the, workshops, retreats, classes. I offer a lot of long-term classes that are deep dives, so that people can be doing sustainable growth and change, but also every once in a while offering some shorter term things that are easier to just dip into in a more casual way to get your feet wet too. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for being here. Yeah, Chelsea's an awesome person. Yeah, she's the real deal. Go check her out. Check out her podcast. Check out her offerings. She walks the walks, lives the life, the inner work. You can hear about the interview that she does, and it's at a serious level. So I just, once again, just thank you so much, Chelsea, for being on here. They will hear from you again because we will talk about 9 inner critics in the future, and probably the big Enneagram retreat too. So thank you so much for
Okay.
being here.
Thank you, Milton.
All right. Thank you all for listening. See you on the next episode. And remember to do it for the gram, not Instagram, but do it for the Enneagram, your inner work. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.